Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. It's morning where I am, but it might not be morning where you are. So good morning, good afternoon, hello. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, PPWR and its ripple effects across the EU regulatory landscape. I imagine most of you are in Europe. I hope you're having a lovely afternoon so far. Before we get started into the content, I wanted to say hello. I'm Preston. I am on our business development team at 3R Sustainability, and I'm also a senior consultant on our strategy team. I get to lead today's event. And so before we get started, I'd love to give a little bit of background about 3R. Ian, if you could go to the next slide. Thank you. All right, so 3R is a full-service sustainability consulting solutions provider that creates business value. Our real goal is to realize the business value of sustainability. We work across a variety of service areas and industries. So today you'll be hearing from some of our folks on the packaging team working in product and packaging sustainability. But as you can see here, we do a lot of other things as well. So our sustainability reporting team works on reports and regulatory alignment, both in the United States and in Europe. And then our climate team is working more technically to do greenhouse gas inventories, product carbon footprints, all that good stuff. We also have a built environment team that works on decarbonization on the ground, so for some of our more manufacturing heavy clients. And then finally, SAS, Sustainability Assurance Services, is our assurance division, our sister company that works on third-party data validation and assurance. Next slide, please. So 3R does a variety of webinars throughout the year. They're all free to attend. And the ones coming up are focused on EcoVadis and CDP. So those customer requests, if you're getting the voluntary reporting customer requests, those two are going to be great to join. You can, if you've registered today, you'll be on our mailing list to get future updates. And you can also subscribe on LinkedIn. We always post our webinars there. So that's a bit of the nitty gritty. I also want to mention that we'll be using the Q&A feature today in GoToWebinar. So if you have any questions for these two presenters today, please use the Q&A function. With that, I'll hand it to Ian and Cesar, and we can get going with the good content.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Preston. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining. My name is Ian Kay. I'm a consultant here at 3R in the product and packaging service line. I have a background in food science and food technology, specifically around packaging and food packaging, and worked in kind of corporate America, doing a lot of the EU or the US regulations around packaging, EPR, SB 343, before I kind of came to 3R to work on more large over-ending type of packaging regulations. Cesar, if you want to introduce yourself as well.
Of course, gladly. Welcome everybody for this session today. My name is Cesar Carreño. I am the Associate Director for European Operations at 3R Europe, and I have been working in climate change, sustainability, and disclosure for the past 17 years, both in Germany and in the Netherlands, working in consultancies mainly within the European context. So happy to be here. I am an agricultural engineer from background, so very happy to participate.
Awesome. Thank you, Cesar. Very excited to be here today to talk to you guys about PPWR and kind of how it impacts and intersects with a lot of other EU regulations. So our agenda for today, we'll start off with a quick introduction of what the packaging and packaging waste regulation is, why it matters, some key obligation requirements, quick overview of the timeline, and who might be an obligated producer. Then move into kind of how it overlaps with other EU regulations, talking about some of the PPWR impacts on commercial transactions, and then how 3R can support and how we can help companies kind of minimize the impact of PPWR. So before we kind of jump into it, we wanted to start off with a quick poll to try to understand kind of where everyone's coming from today, what industries everyone's working in today. So Cesar, if you want to launch the poll, so we can kind of start getting some engagement.
If you can help us with the poll, that will be great. Also, please be reminded, you can answer all of your questions, write all of your questions in written form on the Q&A box that you see.
Yes, and we'll also have time for questions at the end as well. So we'll go through kind of all the questions in the chat at the end.
Yeah, I'll give it 30 more seconds before we end the poll. Great attendance, by the way. I see a wide variety of attendance on industry over here. We're quite happy to have you here. This is great. This is going great. Okay, I believe we are good to go. Thank you so much for sharing. We have a big attendance from the industrial sector, of course, which because this, of course, tackles upon you. We have technology, healthcare, science, consumer and retail, food and agriculture. And the main goal of this session is, of course, to support and answer all of your questions because there are overlaps and piggybacking between different legislations within the European context. And our main goal is to try to clarify this to all of you. I will end the poll here, and I will give the floor back to Ian.
Awesome. Thank you, Cesar. Great to see kind of people from a lot of different industries. PPWR definitely impacts pretty much anything to do with packaging, so it can kind of have this far-reaching impacts across many different industries. So to start, we'll kind of jump in on what PPWR is, doing a quick introduction on the regulation. So the EU Packaging and Packaging Waste Regulation is a regulation that applies directly across all of the EU member states. It's kind of a comprehensive regulation governing different uses of packaging around design, use, and waste management. It replaces and strengthens the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive. So this was the previous kind of packaging waste regulation in place in the EU. But one of the drawbacks of this one is it allowed a lot of national interpretation of some of the policies, different targets that can make it difficult on businesses and different companies to kind of comply. And lastly, PPWR applies to all packaging placed onto the EU marketplace. So this can bring responsibility not only to different brand owners, producers, manufacturers, but potentially also importers from other countries, distributors that might be kind of crossing border lines. So it's really very a far-reaching type of regulation. Why does PPWR matter? So this has a lot of different goals within the regulation itself, but kind of, as you might guess from the name of the regulation, one of the main goals is to reduce packaging waste. But on top of that, it's to reduce the environmental and human health impacts of packaging waste. So since the early 2000s, there's kind of been a steady rise in packaging waste, despite other regulations in the EU, the PPWD, the previous packaging waste regulation, to kind of reduce the per capita packaging waste. So we've kind of seen from 2005, with 158.3 kilograms per capita has grown all the way to 177.8 kilograms per capita in 2023. So this has a lot of far-reaching effects, including a significant contribution to different carbon emissions as well, which can impact the environment and human health. So PPWR kind of aims to reduce that packaging waste growth and try to get a handle on some of that. Furthermore, PPWR is ensuring that producers fund and manage recycling systems. So this kind of relieves local governments of that burden, of the financial burden of maintaining, improving, upgrading kind of the recycling infrastructure. And even furthermore, it creates a steady revenue for improving this recycling infrastructure through annual EPR reporting, other fees for companies within the different PPWR policies. PPWR also aims to drive accountability, transparency, and circularity in supply chains. So with a lot of these different targets through recyclability, reuse targets that are within PPWR, and even a lot of the reporting and corporate reporting requirements, a lot of these come together to increase supplier engagement, to be able to comply with these design and labeling requirements. This is going to require more strong data collection across the supply chain, really just making sure that everything is kind of in place and accounted for to kind of meet a lot of these requirements. And lastly, it creates a harmonized framework for design standards, reuse targets, and eco-modulated EPR fees. So different than the PPWE, or the Expired Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive, the PPWR doesn't allow for a lot of this natural interpretation that the previous regulation did. This led to a lot of non-standardized targets across the EU, which the PPWR aims to kind of fix by harmonizing a lot of these targets together, making it easier for brands, producers, manufacturers to comply with this regulation. So this slide kind of goes over some of the specific obligation and requirements within PPWR. I'm not going to go through it completely, a lot of writing here, but I encourage you to screenshot this slide. It has a lot of good information, or go back into the recording when we post this online and pause it on this part as well. But just some key areas that I do want to highlight on the left side there are this kind of specific obligation areas within PPWR. It sets recyclability targets, recycled content targets, including minimum percent PCR in plastics, packaging weight reductions on like caps on the weights and volumes, along with like decreasing empty space in e-commerce shipments, single-use plastic bans, reuse targets, harmonized recycling labels, along with some of the reporting and EPR, including eco-modulated fees and substance restrictions. So it's a very, again, overarching regulation. It touches a lot of different aspects that can kind of have a lot of ripple effects throughout your supply chain, kind of how business is being done, along with impacting a lot of other EU regulations. So quick visual on some just the implementation timeline. So again, you can kind of go back and look at this more thoroughly on your own time, but just some things to highlight within this. Enforcement largely doesn't go into effect until February 2027, with some EPR programs beginning before that. The harmonized labeling mandate kind of starts within 2028, with initial recyclability and reuse targets applying in 2030, and then on to 2035 and 2040, reaching full recyclability at scale and kind of implementing some of those higher recyclability and recycled content targets as well. And then throughout this entire process, this kind of phased approach of PPWR, there'll be ongoing annual reporting and compliance checks that companies will need to follow to make sure everyone's kind of on track to hit a lot of these targets. So who is obligated for PPWR? So there's pretty much three pretty simple and key qualifiers for who might be an obligated producer. The first is that they place packaged products into the EU marketplace. This applies to all packaging types, primary, secondary, and tertiary, which brings a lot of manufacturing type of companies into scope as well for the secondary and tertiary packaging. And then if a company does not qualify for some of the micro enterprise exemptions that they have, specifically companies with less than 10 employees and gross revenue less than 2 million euros. So pretty simple. It's, again, a very large reaching regulation that a lot of different companies across the supply chain will have to interact with. Awesome. So now we're going to move into kind of how PPWR overlaps with some of the different other EU regulations kind of out there. So the first thing to know with this is that PPWR does not exist in isolation. So it sits as a piece of a broader EU circular economy framework. PPWR, as you can see on the left, along with some of the eco design or the ESPR, corporate reporting, waste and framework directives, and EPR rules, these are all working together to kind of hit that circular action plan within the EU, which then sits within the EU Green Deal. So PPWR is kind of designed to align a lot of the packaging policy with other climate, waste, and resource efficiency goals to increase kind of the sustainability effort within the EU. So the first kind of set of regulations we're going to talk about is how PPWR overlaps with some product design regulations. So the big two for this one are the Eco Design and Sustainable Products Regulation, or the ESRP, and the Waste Framework Directive, or the WFD. So the ESRP sets EU requirements to improve product sustainability, durability, and recyclability, including those supported by digital product passports. The key way that this regulation and PPWR kind of overlap and interact, I would say, is that they kind of function as complementary policies. So ESPR is more around the product side of the packaging or product, while PPWR focuses on the packaging requirements for recyclability, reuse targets, etc. So they both kind of push companies to integrate circular design principles in at the development stage. So we're trying to attack this problem further up in the supply chain instead of trying to worry about it after the waste has already been generated. We're trying to design a lot of these packaging and products to be more recyclable and more sustainable. And lastly, both these regulations kind of drive greater supply chain transparency, which we'll get into more later in the presentation. But essentially, with having a lot of these different targets, reuse, recyclability, et cetera, it's forcing companies to have better data collection, better transparency and data communication across the supply chain to meet these requirements. So next is the Waste Framework Directive, or the WFD. So this establishes kind of the EU waste hierarchy and framework for waste management and extended producer responsibility. So essentially what that means is how the EU deals with waste. This kind of generates that framework of what we should consider first. So in the order that they have it sent, it should be prevention, then reuse next, recycling, recovery, and then disposal, again, kind of being the last resort for packaging and products. So how does this overlap with PPWR? So PPWR actually operationalizes a lot of this framework and the principles within WFD through the waste reduction targets, reuse targets, recyclability, and harmonized EPR rules. The PPWR, by implementing a lot of these targets and policies, is using that waste framework to kind of understand how we deal with packaging waste, trying to be more sustainable at first with prevention, reuse, recycling, and again with disposal of a lot of these products and packaging being the last resort. And so both of these regulations push the responsibility of waste management onto the producers, specifically with a lot of the EPR policies as well. So next, kind of wanted to touch on how PPWR overlaps with different chemical and material regulations. The two big ones that come to mind here are the REACH, which is the registration, evaluation, authorization, and restriction of chemicals, and then the FCMs, or the food contact material regulations, including both the EC and the EU parts of it. So first, I guess kind of the big thing to take away with this, it's going to be a lot of similar overlaps, mostly kind of around the design of packaging itself. But essentially, packaging sustainability requirements kind of must align with the EU chemical safety and material regulations. So for REACH, PPWR and REACH both kind of dictate what materials and substances are allowed and not allowed within packaging materials. So companies now must kind of design these packaging materials to comply with both of REACH for the chemical safety restrictions, along with some of the other packaging substances of concern requirements within PPWR. So companies must kind of choose materials that are both recyclable and free from any of these restricted substances, while also maintaining the function that the packaging is supposed to provide for the target or for the product as well. For the food contact materials regulations, very similar type of overlap, again, kind of on that design aspect of things. So food packaging specifically within the food industry must meet both these FCM regulations alongside the PPWR sustainability requirements. So this is recycled content targets, recyclability targets, and specifically for food, this can kind of get challenging because hitting all these targets, you need to also make sure that you're maintaining the packaging function around barrier and different mechanical properties to ensure there's that food safety aspect for consumers, but also that your packaging can protect the food as well during logistical kind of transit across the supply chain. So for this next one, I'm going to hand it over to Cesar to kind of talk about some of the corporate transparency and supply chain reporting requirements and overlap.
Thank you so much, Ian. And then, of course, all of us understand how the PPWR connects with the CSRD and how does this affect the data reporting into ESRS E1 particularly, and then, of course, what is the role of, for instance, environmental product declarations and how can they support this reporting. No? For all of you which are familiar with the CSRD, you do understand that there is a need of massive data points that need to be submitted into the platform. And of course, all of the companies which are listed on the CSRD did even additional detail for this specific purpose. Nonetheless, this does not mean that they're 100% overlapping. There are companies that might need to report to CSRD and PPWR, and other companies that need to report to the PPWR only, no? But you need to take into account that, of course, there is some sort of a standardization there. CSRD and PPWR belong to the same value chain, but they have different purposes. PPWR is very focused on product level. It tells you what are the specific goals and what is the specific data that needs to be reported in your product. So it's the what. And for CSRD is the how it needs to be reported in association with the other indicators under ESRS. No? So all of the data that is collected through the PPWR can be used to report to CSRD, but it's not the only type of data that needs to be reported, because, for instance, packaging can be considered one of the risks that can be reported on the CSRD IROS, for instance. No, it could be one indicator, one specific point of action, so forth and so on. No, but then again, the way that you track and monitor and trace the information for the PPWR can help you enhance and improve the systems for the overall CSRD. And of course, will increase the transparency within your value chain, more information with your suppliers, either tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, etc. Not only for the suppliers of packaged goods, but also with tier 2 suppliers, which are the suppliers of the packaging. This means, I don't know, big bags or barrels or boxes, so forth and so on. No? So how this does touch upon on the DSRS? Well, you have ESRS E1, which is the climate change, then you have the 5, and then you have the one for water, so forth and so on. Different packaging affects all of these different points in various manners, no? But then again, you need to follow the criteria for reporting on the CSRD, and there are some decisions that you will take under the PPWR that will affect the amount of information and how environmentally friendly the information that you support provide for the CSRD. No, for instance, packaging decisions will impact circular economy performance, as a good example. No, and of course, transparent disclosure for PPWR can serve as evidence for circularity in decision-making processes, and of course, waste management claims for your customers under ESRS E5. So it's very important for you to have that information at hand to provide to your customers, because your customers will need to report to CSRD. No. And the third one is environmental product declaration. It's important to highlight that the environmental product declaration is normally, let's say, dedicated to construction materials, but it's widening more and more to include all type of materials. And a lot of packaging belongs in the construction industry. So what is the environmental product declaration? It's a third-party verified document which can work on the different programs. One that we recommend is EPD International. And of course, it overlaps with the PPWR because it can reduce fragmentation of information, because you want to compare to national regulations. It may cause a slight increase in data collection because you need to align it with the national EPR. And of course, it can increase recurrence for technical substantiation for environmental claims. Why? Because EPD is a type 3 environmental claim. This means that it's a third-party verified claim. These, for instance, can serve the purpose of answering one of the questions that I saw in the chat, which is specifically if you need to collect like your supplier statement only, which is compliance with the PPWR, that is not enough. You need the conformity document. You need to obtain a conformity document that needs to be provided under the PPWR. Remember that all of you need to report under your specific national scheme. So you have 27 national schemes, and you need to collect your document of conformity from your suppliers. So a supplier statement is not enough, and developing an environmental product declaration from your supplier, specifically for barrels or for big bags, can help a lot. So all of these overlap more or less and can support either you or your customers to report to CSRD in a more transparent manner. Yeah, back to you.
Yes, thank you, Cesar. So next, we're going to kind of move into the PPWR impact of commercial transactions. So Cesar is going to kind of walk through some of this stuff as well for us. Before we do that, we're going to kind of launch our second poll. So Preston or whoever, if you guys want to launch that, so we can kind of get people answering that question.
The poll has been launched. Please do help us with a quick answer.
Thank you,
Again,
everyone.
please feel free to add more questions. I'm very happy to see more and more questions there. We will leave around 10 to 15 minutes, try to answer all of your questions towards the end of the session. I will leave the poll open for 1 minute, so we have like 30 seconds more. So feel free just to add your answers. We will be very happy to see the picture about who needs to report. I see a lot of people is a little bit not in the clear about if they need to report or not. It's around 40%. Around 30% do need to report. 25% is not expecting to report, but is expecting to be requested by their customers. Okay, that's good. Thank you so much, everybody, and we will finish the poll here. I see there is a lot of people which are unsure if they need to report or not, and that's why you are attending this session. So we will be very happy to support you on that specific front to clear any misunderstanding that you might have. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you so much, Ian. Okay, good. The commercial impact of the PPWR. What is expected? Remember that, yes, the PPWR will tell you what to do with your final product, which is the packaging as well, but the CSRD will tell you how to report, what to report, and in which manners. It's the same value chain, different goals. But what happened in the commercial aspect, because as a company that produces a packaged good, you will need to purchase packaging. And then, of course, the packaging might transform into waste toward the end of the line, or maybe it's not recyclable, or maybe it is recyclable, but in the country where you export, there's no recycling schemes. So many things can happen, no? But why does this take place? Because the responsibility of having a package that can be transformed into waste flows around the value chain, no? So you have the manufacturer, which makes the packaging good, and of course the manufacturer places this into the EU market, either secondary, tertiary materials, no? This could be because they sell either a packaged good that can be sold in the same package or repackaged, and of course the brand owner, which is the one who allocates the responsibility to develop this product, which could be either within the European Union or outside the European Union. No? So the brand owner has the responsibility to develop the contracts to the manufacturers to decide the packaging according to their own wishes or needs. No? So there is a lot of responsibility there. Then of course there is the importer. Why? Because the importer places packaging from third parties countries which are not within the EU into the EU marketplace. And of course the distributors, which brings packaging across borders, direct to consumer sales, so forth and so on, and potentially at the end consumer. There might be some slight differences here and there within the value chains, but this is just one example, no? So what is expected? That the packaging compliance needs to be addressed in commercial agreements in advance. It could be that you are like the brand owner and you can define your packaging according to your specificities, even change of materials or smaller packaging or reusable packaging, so forth and so on. I would say this is one of the main responsibilities. Of course, the brand owner can decide how the packaging could be, but of course the manufacturer will assess if this is feasible or not without financially affecting the operations of their businesses as well. No, so there will be a back and forth conversation with they need to find a middle ground. The manufacturer is saying, okay, this is feasible, and the brand owner says, okay, this is acceptable. So there will be a back and forth there. No, but of course the bigger demand might come either down the value chain, no, maybe from the end consumer, because the end consumer might say, I don't want to deal more with big cardboard boxes. I want smaller cardboard boxes. And then the pressure comes from top. But then the decision making will come either from the brand owner or the manufacturer. You need to be aware that this pressure will come onto you. No? There could be the potential of having a specific PPWR contract clauses within the contract. to secure mandatory compliance. You can have legal ramifications for not compliance, for instance. You can have contract termination rights, and of course, increased frequency of audits, for instance. So that's why you need to have an auditable statement within your product. Let's say you go for the low-hanging fruit. You make a life cycle assessment. On top of that, you can add an environmental product declaration, no? And let's say, and then you want to go to be sure that you comply with everything, you go with a declaration of conformity from your national context, no? So you need to be aware that this will come to you. It might be slowly gaining momentum as of now, but within the next year, the pressure will come. So you better be prepared, no? You need to have some sort of framework prepared, some sort of budget allocated, some sort of technical experts on your team to help you to overcome these hurdles as soon as possible. And the most important part, either the procurement team is you, if you are the buyer, needs to be properly informed about what's needed in order to comply with the regulations. And the sales team from the producer needs to be aware about what are the attributes of the products that they're selling. So there is need for capacity building, so forth and so on. So everybody will need to be up to their game in this specific process, no? Next slide, please, Ian. Okay, so what is happening regarding cost and deal terms? For example, for the packaging redesign, the packaging volume and weight needs to be minimized while still performing the function. This impacts several fronts. Why? Because if the packaging is being reduced, the waste at the end of the process is reduced, the end of life. Weight can also be reduced during the transportation and distribution in the logistic phase as well. So there are a lot of benefits there, no? But you need to consider other additional costs, which could be new materials, tools that you might need, retesting, certification, EPR fees, traceability systems, so forth and so on. So there's the need to make an investment on this specific front. You don't need to do all of your investment now. You can pilot it if you want, but the idea is to be prepared as much as possible in order to minimize the risks. Now, within the supply chain operational costs, e-commerce, for instance, they have around 50% empty space reduction, which can have cascading space. Most of you might have seen when you order something with one of these web-based store, they send you a big box with one USB. That needs to be taken into account, no? There is additional companies may need to revisit warehouse operations, reverse logistics, return systems, storage footprints, and vendor capabilities. So your processes needs to be updated accordingly. You might need some sort of engineering in that specific front. And of course, transportation impacts, because you need to minimize the return and the reuse system, the pallet wraps, the repacking, e-commerce shipping formats, so forth and so on. So this is, it's not that you will do everything on your own. You will need other partners and stakeholders in this process to support you to reach this specific goal, no? Remember, if you're making an investment, somebody else will need to make an investment, because you will need to change, for instance, if you produce packaging, you will need to change your suppliers because you're changing the material, or you will reduce the demand from your suppliers because you're changing the size, etc. So everybody will need to make adjustment. It's not just you. A lot of companies think that they are the only ones doing the effort and the sacrifice. Is not you. Everybody down the value chain will have to more or less have some sort of adaptation strategy, no? And on top of that, there is the contract impact, because you might need to renegotiate pricing as well, because you're buying fewer raw material, long-term agreements to secure supply, private labeling, branding relationships, packaging specifications and approval rights, data testing and documentation obligations. Maybe the company that is testing your current version of the packaging is not well equipped to test the newer version of your packaging. It could be all of those fronts are open and you need to take them into consideration. Next slide, please, Ian. Okay, now the commercial impact of the PPWR, the risk transfer and disclosure, just like I mentioned. It could be that you say, okay, it's only packaging, that's it, no? But what you're selling can potentially transform into waste towards the end of life. So what you're selling is not only your product, you're also selling potential waste or potential RDF or potential recyclable material. That depends on how you put it together, no? So the risk can transfer and move down the value chain. For instance, from the packaging supplier, you need to start with the design to avoid and minimize the waste generation as much as possible. The manufacturer, of course, when the non-compliant package enters production, then of course the brand owner, and then of course the distributor and end consumer, because then the packaging, which could be potentially a waste, enters the market, enters society, and then it becomes somebody else's problem. The municipality or people that does not have the resources to manage the packaging, or countries where they have the ambition to better manage packaging, but they don't have access to the resources or the technology to do so. No, and of course there are the disclosure requirements. Why? Because you need to take into account a formal statement that the packaging complies with the PPWR requirements. This is the declaration of conformity, and of course key compliance documents for market placement. Remember that you need to report to your national scheme. You are 27, you need to report to a national scheme, but then again, there might be other specific requirements that you need to enter specific markets within the European Union. No? CSRD alignment, data transparency and accuracy, technical documentation again, and environmental claims type 3, which are third-party verified. Once again, could be either environmental product declaration or doing an LCA that is externally verified under ISO 40044 and ISO 40040. And of course, if applicable, the digital product passport. What are the key business implications for this specific regulation, where suppliers are the first source of risk? Again, it's not that just because you produce the product, you become a source of risk. You produce the product most of the times based on the specifications of your customer. So it's a joint process. I would suggest, if you are somebody who outsource the production of packaging, start rethinking how you want to approach this. Start conversations with your suppliers. If you're a company that produces packaging, reach out now and start conversations with your customer about what are their specific desires to avoid and minimize risks regarding the PPWR. No, and of course, everything that is brands and commercial partners may be able to absorb disruption, because there are bigger players, companies with billions of euros or billions of dollars. They might be able to absorb some fees here and there, but that is not the goal. Remember that for all practical purposes, the main goal for bigger companies is to make a financial gain. The business of business is business. That's it. But if you add some environmental attribute that can help them not only to comply with the national regulations, but also help them to save money, win-win scenario. You will be placed high in the value chain, and you will have preference for purchasing. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. You're muted, Ian. Some technical hiccups.
Is that better?
There you go. Much better.
Awesome. Apologies for that.
No worries.
Can you see the presentation again?
Yes,
okay, awesome. Thank you for kind of walking through some of those EU regulation overlaps and the commercial impact. I know we've kind of talked a lot from what PPWR is, how it is a part of a greater kind of EU circular economy, and how that can impact business and relationships and commercial transactions. It's kind of a large, complex web, and it can be a lot, and it's complex. But you're not alone, kind of within trying to understand these regulations, comply with them, and that's kind of where 3R can kind of come in to help minimize some of the impact of PPWR. So, wanted to start off with our third poll, kind of understand what companies, what kind of help you're interested in, what's most confusing about PPWR. So if we can kind of launch that third poll, please.
Again, I will leave the poll open for 1 minute, so please feel free to answer and do let us know if you need help and with what. Starting to screen the questions. We will have 10-15 minutes toward the end of this session to answer your questions. But yes, very, very interesting questions here. Okay. So we do have a good chunk of companies that need support with data collection, with LCAs, circularity assessment, internal communication, capacity building. It's always refreshing to see you understanding what do you specifically need. Okay, great. Thank you so much, everybody. I will end the poll here and then give the floor back to Ian.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, so a lot of different challenges within PPWR that can make it difficult to comply with a lot of these regulations. So understand that there's a lot of different questions about what needs to be done. So I wanted to kind of briefly summarize some of the things we talked about into kind of 4 key compliance challenges within PPWR. So the first is kind of surrounding the packaging design requirements. The main challenge here being that many existing packaging formats may need significant redesign. From some of the different recyclability targets, reduction in packaging weights, specific sector reuse targets, along with minimum PCR requirements for plastic packaging. This can impact packaging quickly and also lead to a lot of different costs. And furthermore, a lot of these packaging design requirements are going to impact some of that supply chain as well, which kind of brings us to one of the second key compliance challenges, being supply chain data and transparency across the supply chain. So the challenge here is that companies are going to kind of need robust and complete data from suppliers and converters, and just across the entire supply chain in general. Again, it should be kind of a part of that commercial transaction and in commercial agreements of who's responsible for who, or who's responsible for what kind of documentation and substantiation is needed, and who will provide a lot of those documents as well. So this kind of includes material composition data, PCR content, recyclability performance, along with packaging flow across national markets in general. The third kind of key challenge that we've identified is just alignment across all these different EU regulatory landscapes. Again, touching on that design aspect as well. There's a lot of EU regulations that we've talked about, the product design, chemical safety, food contact safety, the reporting requirements with CSRD. The key challenge here being that companies just must engage and comply with a lot of these overlapping regulations. There may be contradictory design requirements potentially through recyclability and reuse targets, while also needing to maintain the functionality of a lot of this packaging. So that could be complex and difficult, quick, again, leading to costs of new materials, new testing and certification requirements, substantiation documentation across the supply chain, all of that good stuff. And then lastly is the kind of operational and cost implications. Kind of, again, a lot of these challenges flow within each other. This last one, again, they're talking about redesign and testing costs, supplier engagement and transparency across the supply chain, operational and logistical costs, and increased compliance and reporting obligations. So the key challenge here is that compliance is going to kind of require cross-functional coordination between a lot of your different teams: procurement, regulatory, design, and the consulting companies you might bring in. It's going to be a connected and community effort to kind of comply with this PPWR regulation, while also maintaining manageable costs and not a lot of impact maybe to your day-to-day business. So what does this mean for brands and packaging manufacturers and just everyone across the supply chain? Like, what do we need to do? So brands need to ensure that packaging kind of meets a lot of these standards, complying with targets, applying harmonized labeling, reporting all of the packaging placed into the EU market through EPR reporting, while also paying some of these eco-modulated EPR fees, and then monitor just all these compliance deadlines, as it's a phased approach for a lot of this stuff. So even just kind of wrapping your head around when you need to do things by could be a challenge. For packaging manufacturers, they need to kind of provide technical data And this kind of, again, goes through how that will be addressed within commercial agreements and who's going to be responsible for providing a lot of this data, or the cost of a lot of these testing needs and requirements. But the design as well of a lot of these packaging needs to meet the standards of PPWR. Packaging manufacturers need to report on secondary and tertiary packaging placed in the EU. Again, pay eco-modulated EPR fees for that secondary and tertiary packaging, possibly offer digital traceability solutions, but more so just kind of overarching, you need to devise strategies to reach compliance in the near future. This is, again, a phased approach, so there is time to kind of build those strategies to kind of protect your business and future-proof your portfolios. So important for packaging manufacturers to get ahead of that. So how can 3R support? Where can we come in to help get companies and some of your businesses ready for PPWR? So we provide services and offerings within to bring companies up to compliance, but more than that, to go beyond compliance. So we can prepare for regulatory compliance to help avoid penalties and streamline a lot of the processes. This can kind of include support with regulatory obligation assessments, monitoring different legislation, data collection processes, whether that be templates or other processes to kind of make that more efficient and easy for the different companies, fee modeling for EPRs, and also registration and reporting into the individual pros, recyclability performance assessments, labeling, declaration, substances of concern review, just kind of all these different things we are able to help you with that PPWR will have impacts in across its own regulation and other regulations within the EU as well. And then beyond compliance, 3R can help you companies reduce costs and gain that competitive advantage. So we can find eco-modulation deduction opportunities. That kind of goes along with some maybe packaging redesign, material substitution recommendations, finding packaging formats and materials that will put your company in the best position to minimize a lot of that risk. We can kind of help with some of these packaging audits and risk assessments, understanding what documentation is needed, what kind of substantiation is needed for claims for a lot of these recyclability performances that are needed. We can plan and project different planning and project management to pilot new packaging ideas, including reuse systems, which is again part of the PPWR regulation. And then more generally, just looking at EPR forward strategy, including alignment with circularity and different sustainability targets. So 3R can be your partner in understanding PPWR, complying with it, and preparing for the future as well, and just interacting with all these different EU regulations and understanding how that's going to impact the commercial side as well. That's everything that we had for today. Really appreciate you all joining. We'll now kind of have time for questions. Cesar, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add before we move to questions.
No, nothing at all. We can maybe just start working around with the questions. I will choose a couple to answer just in case, and maybe you can just choose your own, Ian.
Yeah, I can't see the questions since I'm sharing my screen. So if there are any specifically you want to throw to me, just read them.
I think you can definitely stop sharing the screen and just go to the chat box. That's
a good point too.
Okay, so quick question that I see from here. One question, it says, if did I understood well, micro enterprise are not concerned with the EPR, but they can comply with PPWR regulation. Not precisely. They micro SMEs, unless they are VSMEs, which are listed on the CSRD. Normally, they should not consider with the CSRD reporting, but nonetheless, it's good for them to start consider how can they gain momentum and space by compliance with PPWR. Why? Because you will be listed as preferred supplier, even if you're a small supplier. So chances are that you can enhance and strengthen your position if you take into account PPWR and EPR as well. No? Another quick question before giving a couple more to Ian. Let me just double check. If our company is based in the UK, but supplies to customers in the EU, then do we have to report to the PPWR? Yes, indeed. You will need to identify yourself as a manufacturer, importer, brand owner, so forth and so on. So this is a scheme that takes into account the inbound flow to the European Union as well. Ian,
Yeah.
choose. May I go?
Still reading through some of these. What did my tab do? So if there are any others that you need to, if you can find Cesar that you want to answer as well, while I'm still reading through some of these.
Yeah, sure. Not a problem. So another question is, how does reporting work for the PPWR? In the PPWR, although it's a transnational regulation within the European Union, each specific state has its own national registration. No, so you need to go and register on your national registration scheme, and then again, you will need to identify as producer, manufacturer, importer, brand owner, and the last one for customers is unpacker first. It's very important. You need to understand this. If the European Union is the first country where your product is unpacked, then it applies. So you need to register there as well. And of course, this needs to happen before you place that packaged good or package in the market. So there are two that I can remember. The one from France is CITE, that's one, and the one from Germany is the CSVR. So those two are the ones that I can remember. But there are national entities which are like the registration or at least the designated operational entity at country level within the European Union. Yeah.
Yeah, so one question here is that around kind of the micro enterprise exemptions. So the question is, are micro enterprise not concerned for EPR, but they do have to comply with PPWR regulation? No, so if you qualify for one of those micro enterprises, you will be kind of exempt from just the PPWR regulation in general. You don't kind of meet some of those like company size requirements for PPWR. So it's more than just the EPR aspect. Another question here on harmonizing EPR rules. Let me scroll down to it real quick. So what does harmonized EPR rules mean? Will the reporting be one common reporting system for EU going forward? So that's tough to say on the exact system itself. I can say about EPR harmonized rules is that it's more harmonizing some of that framework around EPR. So how you talk about the waste directive and how you deal with packaging waste. It's not going to be identical across every single country. There might be some specific language within the EPR rules and how you report that might be different, but it's kind of utilizing those same frameworks across the EU to make sure we're pushing into the same direction towards kind of EU circularity, if that makes sense. Cesar, back to you with any questions you may see.
Yes, there is one very interesting here for a company that produces pulp. If they are mandated to report under the PPWR, chances are no, but you might be mandated to report on the EPR because you will need to report what content of your pulp is recycled. And if you comply with the regulations, for example, heavy metal as well, which is, I think it's less than 100 milligrams per kilogram or something like that. So chances are you might need to add information under the EPR, which will connect to the PPWR. No, yeah, that is the best response I can give to that. No, will PPWR has varying reporting formats from country to country across Europe? I do not think so. Chances are that each national entity will have its own platform that might look slightly different, but the points will be pretty much the same, unless the national government wants to do something different. For instance, something that I have observed, that in France, there are always some slight variations of whatever the rest of the European Union does. No, for instance, if they want to do something like EPD, which is Environmental Product Declaration, in France, it's pretty much the same with an added value, for example, with additional criteria to be included in the final report, and that can be used at national level, for instance. No, another regulations that I can remember from France, the methodology, which is the bilan carbon, which is heavily utilized there, based on the GHG protocol, but not necessarily the GHG protocol as well. But yes, chances are the data will be pretty much the same. Maybe the front end of the reporting platform will look different according to the national schemes. Yeah, but you can definitely unify that. Let me see. I think we have opportunities for a couple more. Uh, uh, um, they're pretty much all the same.
Yeah.
Does the free from CPR rule? Will the participants receive a copy of the presentation? Yes, you will.
Yes,
Um,
it'll be recorded and kind of put up on our website as well, so you'll be able to go back and see the recording whenever you'd like.
okay, amazing. I see you gave already the answer by answering another question. Yes.
Yes.
Happy to do
Yeah.
so. Happy to
Awesome.
do so.
Well, appreciate your time, Cesar. Appreciate everyone's time on the webinar. Please contact us if you have any more questions that we didn't get to kind of in the question section of this, but please complete our short survey. Use a lot of our contact information to reach out to 3R. Again, my name is Ian K for the product packaging service line, and with me is Cesar as well on the EU kind of side with PPWR and a lot of the other different EU regulations. So thank you so much and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.